was tilting a cascade of cornflakes into a pink plastic bowl when my phone vibrated against the chipped kitchen counter, its screen lighting the faded tiles with a cold little rectangle of light that didn't match the warmth of the morning. Daisy sat at the table, bare feet swinging, humming off-key to some cartoon theme while she lined up strawberries along the rim of her bowl like a crown. Outside, winter sunlight pushed weakly through the blinds, turning dust motes into slow-falling snow. From the hallway, our old heater rattled and sighed like it always did. If you had walked in right then, you might have thought my life was quiet, ordinary, safe. Then I picked up my phone and saw my mother's name, Margaret, one new text. "No gifts this year, we're struggling." 8 words. Simple, heavy. I stared at them longer than I should have, feeling a small knot twist somewhere beneath my ribs. For a moment, I believed her without question, because that's what I had trained myself to do since childhood. Fill the gap between what I needed and what my mother would give with excuses that made her look kinder than her choices. I typed back, thumb hovering only once. "It's okay, Mom. Don't worry about us. Daisy doesn't need anything." I hit send, set the phone down, and forced a smile back onto my face as Daisy asked if she could have more milk. I told myself I understood, that times were hard, that bills could suffocate anyone. But a piece of me, the part that had spent a lifetime making room for other people's comfort, flickered uneasily. I didn't know it yet, but that small flicker was the first spark of something that would burn down the old rules of my family. My name is Claire, and if you had seen me that morning, hair twisted into a messy knot, robes cinched over old pajamas, Daisy's tiny backpack sitting half-zipped on the counter beside a permission slip, I would have seemed like any other mother doing her best. Normal, unremarkable. But families are experts at disguising fractures beneath wallpaper and holiday cards, and mine had been papering over the same crack for decades. I grew up in a house where every spotlight seemed to find the same face. My older sister, Victoria, she didn't always ask for it, but she never had to. Our mother, Margaret, moved around her like a planet chained to a sun, hovering, warming, obsessing. When Victoria won anything, it was a triumph for the whole family. When she failed, the excuses came quick and soft. When I brought home a B+, my mother nodded distractedly, already glancing at the schedule on the fridge to see what Victoria needed next. I learned early how to fold myself smaller, to become the quiet one, the easy one, the girl who never asked for more than what was offered. My father, Leonard, was kind in a distant, almost spectral way. He'd ruffle my hair, ask if I was okay, then let Margaret's preferences fill every silence. I remember once, at 10, standing in the doorway of the living room with a lopsided solar system project I had built out of foam balls and paint that stained my fingers purple for days. Victoria had just come home with a shiny soccer trophy, all gold plastic and sharp edges. My mother rushed to her, cooing, "My star!" while I stood there, Jupiter wobbling on a bent wire. When I finally stepped forward, Margaret glanced at my work and said, "Oh, that's nice, Claire, just put it on the table," already turning back to my sister. That tiny dismissal didn't end my world that day, but it shifted something inside me, a quiet little tectonic plate that would later define the way I let people treat me. Life went on like that, with Victoria in the center and me circling the edge, trying not to make waves. Time passed. I moved out, moved on, built a different kind of quiet for myself. And then Daisy arrived. She came squalling and fierce, all pink cheeks and tight fists, indignant at the cold air and the bright light. I remember holding her in that hospital bed, fluorescent bulbs buzzing like something mechanical and unfeeling above us, while she blinked up at me with eyes too big for her tiny face. In that instant, a vow settled into my bones like a brand. I would never make her feel like a shadow in her own home. Not once. Not ever. Love would not be a prize she had to compete for. Love would be the ground beneath her feet. For a while, I tried to weave my old family into this new promise. I called on Sundays, balancing the phone between my shoulder and ear while Daisy jabbered beside me. We drove up for holidays, carrying carefully wrapped presents that my mother often set aside to open later, while she fussed over the pile from Victoria's family. I mailed crayon drawings and school photos north to my parents' house, sliding them into envelopes with little handwritten notes from Daisy that I helped her spell. Sometimes, Margaret would call and sound engaged, her voice softening when Daisy's small, "Hi, Grandma," floated through the line. Those crumbs of warmth were enough to keep my hope alive, enough to convince me that if I tried just a little harder, if I stayed patient and generous, maybe the scales would finally tip toward fairness. But patterns are stubborn things, and the old one never really changed. Phone calls with my mother were filled with Victoria's kids, their piano recitals, their soccer tournaments, the funny things they said at dinner. Margaret retold their stories with the breathless joy of someone narrating a fairy tale, painting their lives in glitter and gold. "You should have seen Oliver's face when he opened his new bike," she'd say, or "Evie's dance recital was just magical." While she spoke, Daisy would sit beside me on the couch, legs tucked under her, chin resting on my arm, listening with that careful, eager expression that only a 6-year-old can manage. She smiled when my mother laughed. She clapped when Margaret gushed over the other grandchildren. But I noticed the shift, tiny at first. The way Daisy's shoulders dipped when my mother forgot to ask about her school project, the way her questions grew tentative afterward. "Do you think Grandma liked my picture?" "Maybe the mail lost it." Each time I layered lies over the raw spots. "Grown-ups get busy, sweetheart. It's not personal. Grandma loves you, she's just tired." The truth, though, was heavier and uglier. In my family, forgetting had become second nature, a reflex that always cut the same way. Still, I kept smoothing the edges. I kept sending the photos and the drawings and the updates, hoping that one day Margaret would turn and really see the little girl waiting on the other end of the line. So when that text about money came, when Margaret claimed, "No gifts this year, we're struggling," I did what I had always done. I swallowed whatever disappointment flickered up and turned it into something reasonable. Maybe their medical bills had gone up. Maybe Leonard's work hours had been cut. The logical part of me knew precisely how costly a house, a car, a life could be. And on top of that, I knew something else I didn't say out loud. For the last several years, I'd been the quiet scaffolding holding up most of their finances. It had started innocently. One month where a bill was unexpectedly high, my mother calling with that particular tremor in her voice she reserved for emergencies. "Just until things level out," she'd said. I had logged into my bank, set up an automatic transfer for their electric bill. One thing led to another. Water, internet, insurance. My card number threaded through their account so seamlessly that even I stopped seeing the individual strands. It was family, I told myself. Family's help. It was fine. I could afford it, technically. And the relief in my mother's tone each month, the absence of stress in her small talk, felt like justification. I'd become so used to the quiet bleed of my money into their lives that it started to feel like paying my own rent. Not optional, not remarkable. So of course, when she said they were struggling, I believed her. I told Daisy that maybe this year we would make our own magic, just the two of us. And for a week, life resumed its gentle rhythm, like a river flowing over a hidden fracture in the stones below. Daisy practiced the winter song for her school assembly, her little voice warbling through verses about snowflakes and starlight as she twirled in the living room. I threw myself into year-end reports at work, my laptop casting white-blue light across our couch at night. Outside, snow gathered along the sidewalks, soft and unhurried, turning our gritty street into something almost pretty. Everything looked so stable from the outside that even I almost forgot that text. Almost. But if you've ever held a glass with a hairline crack, you know that you can feel its fragility even before it shatters. That's what that week felt like, a careful, deceptive calm. The break came on a Thursday evening, in the kind of quiet that usually soothes me. Daisy sat at the kitchen table, coloring a reindeer with enormous purple antlers. The overhead light hummed faintly. A pot soaked in the sink while I rinsed cereal bowls, my hands moving without thought under water that had already turned lukewarm. My phone, face down beside the stove, buzzed once then again. I almost ignored it, that's how close this moment came to slipping by unnoticed. But something in me, a habit, a hope, a benign expectation, made me reach for it. The screen lit up with a notification from social media, my mother's name in bold. Margaret added 32 new photos. My chest tightened with something like relief. Maybe she'd changed her mind, I thought. Maybe she found a way to send something small. Maybe there was an explanation. I tapped the alert. The first image snapped into focus, and the air in the room seemed to drop several degrees. A towering Christmas tree filled my parents' living room, the same room where I had once watched cartoons on Saturday mornings. The tree I remembered had been modest, with patchwork ornaments and strings of lights that worked only if you wiggled the plug just right. The tree in the photo was something else entirely. Full, perfectly shaped, crowned with a glittering star that looked expensive enough to pay a bill on its own. But it wasn't the tree that made my throat close. It was what lay beneath it. Shopping bags, dozens of them, glossy and screaming in color, designer logos shouting their status. In the next photo, the bags had been emptied, their contents arranged like trophies. Limited edition dolls, electronic gadgets with neon packaging, an entire army of plush animals, some nearly as large as Daisy. Another swipe and I saw neatly wrapped boxes stacked higher than the coffee table, the paper thick and metallic, each corner perfectly folded. And under one of the later photos, a caption, "For my sweet grandbabies, they deserve the world. Couldn't help myself this year." There were emojis lined up like confetti, comments from friends and neighbors. "They're so lucky. Best grandma ever." My eyes scanned the pictures, hunting for a glimpse of Daisy's face, her name in the caption, anything. Image after image, my mother's living room looked like the glossy catalog version of generosity. But every box had a tag with a name in curling silver ink, and every name was one of Victoria's children. Not one was Daisy's. Not even a disingenuous sentence, "No, wish we could have everyone here. No, miss our other little angel." Just absence, clean and deliberate. I felt something inside me go very, very still. I didn't notice at first that my jaw had clenched, that my hand had gone rigid around the phone. It was Daisy who tugged me back into the room. "Mom," she asked, tiny fingers pulling at the hem of my sweater. "Why are you frozen?" Her voice was light, but there was a thread of worry woven through it. I lowered the phone too slowly, my mind still stuck on those glossy bags. "Just looking at something," I managed. But she's 6, and 6-year-olds notice more than we think. She tilted her head, brown hair slipping over one eye, and before I could angle the phone away, her gaze dropped to the screen. There, burned in pixel-perfect color, stood my mother in front of that tree, arms spread wide, grinning. 3 children clung to her, Victoria's kids, all in matching pajamas, surrounded by mountains of gifts. Daisy's breath hitched almost imperceptibly. "Are those for us?" she whispered, as if maybe the answer could fix what she already knew. I swallowed, my tongue thick and useless. "No, sweetheart," I said, my voice strangled and soft. There was a beat where her eyes stayed large, hopeful, then I actually saw the moment they shuddered. Her shoulders slumped a fraction, her mouth pressed into a small, careful line. She nodded, pretending to absorb it, to shrug it off like a grown-up might. "Oh, okay." She turned back to the table, picked up her purple crayon. For a second, I thought I'd escaped. Then, without raising her eyes, she asked, so quietly I almost missed it, "Did Grandma forget me again?" The word "again" slid into the room like a knife that had been sharpened over years. There was no lie I could reach for that wouldn't taste like ash. I didn't tell her Grandma was busy, or that the mail got lost, or that love isn't measured in presents. Not because those things are never true, but because in that moment none of them were. Instead, I set the phone down as if it were something toxic, walked around the table, and wrapped my arms around her from behind. She leaned back into me without hesitation, her small body warm and trusting against my chest. I rested my cheek on the top of her head and said nothing. In that heavy silence, another kind of clarity settled over me. It wasn't rage, not yet. Rage is hot and wild and reckless. This was something colder, denser, like a stone being lowered deliberately into place. Margaret's text about struggling. Her explosion of generosity online for only one branch of the family tree. The years of tiny cuts I had bandaged over, both in myself and in Daisy. It all lined up with sickening symmetry, and I finally saw it not as a series of accidents, but as a pattern my mother had no intention of breaking. Patterns only change when someone refuses to step into their assigned role. That night, after Daisy fell asleep in a tangle of blankets and stuffed animals that suddenly looked small and humble compared to the avalanche in those photos, I stood alone in our dim living room. The Christmas lights we'd hung along the window glowed softly, more yellow than white, casting gentle halos on the glass. Our tree, a modest faux pine we dug out of a discount bin years ago, leaned slightly to the left under the weight of handmade ornaments and paper snowflakes Daisy had cut herself. It didn't look like a catalog. It looked like us. I sat down at the small desk tucked against the wall and opened my laptop. The glow from the screen washed the room in a cold, clinical light that made my reflection in the dark window look like a stranger's. I navigated to the financial dashboard I'd used so often I could have done it blindfolded. There they were, the quiet arteries of my parents' comfort. Automatic transfers to the electric company, the water utility, the internet provider, the insurance premium, monthly contributions to a card used for Margaret's medications, and I suspected more than a few non-essentials. Each line item was modest by itself. Together, they formed a lattice that had been propping up their lives for years. My mouse hovered over the first one. A small dialogue box popped up when I hit cancel. "Are you sure?" it asked. Such a simple question. I thought of Daisy's voice, did Grandma forget me again? And felt something harden in my spine. Yes, I thought, I am. I clicked confirm. The second one, cancel, confirm. The third. A strange calm wrapped around me, slow and steady. By the fifth, my shoulders loosened. By the seventh, my breathing had evened out, as if my body believed we were finally walking away from a heavy load. I waited for guilt to roll in, for that familiar panic that I was being selfish or cruel. It didn't come. Instead, what rose was a different realization. I had been subsidizing my own erasure. While Margaret forgot Daisy's name every time she lined up those shiny bags, my bank account had been quietly making sure the lights stayed on in the house where my daughter was an afterthought. Turning off the tap wasn't vengeance, I decided. It was balance. It was returning responsibility to the people who had dropped it at my feet and walked away. When every last auto payment had been canceled, I closed my laptop and sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the faint buzz of the fridge, the occasional car hissing through slush outside. Somewhere down the hallway, Daisy shifted in her sleep and let out a small sigh. I whispered into the room, "Never again," and found that I meant it. The next morning, I woke before my alarm, a rare thing for me. The air in the apartment felt different, lighter, as if someone had opened a window in the middle of the night and let out a stale, invisible fog. I brewed coffee and packed Daisy's lunch, my movements steady, deliberate. A small part of me wondered how long it would take before anyone noticed that the invisible net I'd been holding had vanished. Days, maybe weeks, I guessed. People rarely notice the scaffolding until it's gone. I pictured Margaret sipping coffee in that over-decorated kitchen, complaining about the rising cost of everything while scrolling through online sales. I imagined Leonard glancing at bills without really seeing them, trusting that the magic solution would appear like it always had. I rinsed my mug and almost laughed when the first crack hit less than 24 hours later. At exactly 8:02 a.m., as Daisy and I sat on the couch tying her shoes, a pounding rattled our front door so hard the frame vibrated. Daisy jumped, her fingers freezing on her laces. "Mom," she whispered, "who is that?" The knocking came again, frantic, the kind of pounding that carries panic behind it. My heart stumbled, but not from fear, from recognition. I wrapped my robe tighter around me and walked down the narrow hallway, my bare feet cold on the wood floor. Peeking through the thin curtain over the small window by the door, I saw my father standing on the stoop. Leonard's hair was mussed, his coat thrown on over pajamas, his breath puffing in frantic clouds into the icy air. His eyes, always gentle, were now wide and edged with something I'd rarely seen on his face, real fear. The sight might once have triggered my instinct to fix, to soothe. Today it didn't. He spotted the movement behind the curtain immediately. "Claire," he called, voice tight, "open the door, honey." "Please." I unlatched the deadbolt and pulled it open. The cold rushed in, swallowing the last of the coffee's warmth. "Dad," I said evenly, "what's going on?" He brushed past me without waiting for an invitation, hauling the door shut behind him. His hands shook as he rubbed them together, more from adrenaline than from the chill. "Everything bounced," he blurted. "Every single bill. The electric, the water, the insurance, your mother's card for her medication, even the internet, the payments all declined at once. We started getting alerts last night and more this morning. Your mother is beside herself. She thinks the bank made a mistake." I watched him, felt that strange lake calm spread through me again. "Okay," I said quietly. "So what do you need from me?" He stared as if I'd answered in another language. "Did something happen with your card?" he demanded. "Did the bank freeze your account? Why didn't the payments go through?" I held his gaze, let the silence sit for a heartbeat, maybe two. "They didn't go through," I said finally, "because I canceled them." For a moment, his mind refused to accept the words. His face went blank like a computer screen just before it reboots. Then his brow furrowed. "You what?" "I canceled the automatic payments," I repeated, more gently than he deserved maybe, but this wasn't about cruelty. "All of them." His mouth opened, closed. A flush crept up his neck into his cheeks. "Why would you do that?" He asked, genuine bewilderment in his tone, as if the idea that I might choose not to carry them had never once crossed his mind. I gestured toward the kitchen. "Come sit down, Dad." He hesitated, then followed, shoulders hunched, the weight of the night's panic still heavy on him. Daisy watched from the threshold of the hallway, eyes wide, sensing tension but not its shape. I gave her a little nod toward her room. "Go finish getting dressed, Bug. I'll be right there." She obeyed, looking back once before disappearing. I poured Leonard a glass of water and slid it across the table, the way he used to slide a mug of cocoa toward me when storms knocked out our power and we huddled in the dark living room with blankets. Funny how gestures echo across decades while their meanings flip. "Dad," I began, folding my hands in front of me, "when was the last time you and Mom paid all of your own bills without help from me?" He opened his mouth, then faltered. His eyes darted up and to the side, searching backward through years he apparently hadn't been paying attention to. The silence stretched. "It was always supposed to be temporary," he said finally, "just until things got easier." "That was over 3 years ago," I replied. "In that time, I've been covering everything: utilities, insurance, the card you use for Mom's prescriptions." And every month when I hinted that maybe it was time to revisit the arrangement, Mom changed the subject or brushed it off and made me feel like I was overreacting. His shoulders dropped a fraction. "We didn't expect you to keep doing it forever," he insisted, but it came out weak. "We thought you never said you couldn't. This isn't about what I can afford," I cut in softly. "It's about what you've come to expect as your right." He flinched, but I wasn't finished. "Do you know what Mom texted me last week?" He shook his head, eyes wary. "She said, 'No gifts this year, we're struggling.' She told me it was too hard, that money was too tight, that Daisy would have to go without anything from you both. I told her it was okay. I told her we didn't need anything." Recognition flickered, this part he knew. He nodded slowly. "That was the truth," he muttered. "We are struggling." "Are you?" I asked, my voice sharpening just a little. "Because a week later, she posted 32 photos online of your living room overflowing with designer shopping bags and expensive gifts. Every single one tagged and labeled for Victoria's kids. Not one mention of Daisy, not one." His face crumpled, confusion battling with shame. "What?" he breathed. He hadn't seen it, I realized. Margaret had curated her audience as carefully as she curated her display. I could see the moment he realized the lie ran in 2 directions, toward me and toward him. "Daisy saw those pictures," I went on, the image flashing behind my eyes, her small face illuminated by the screen, hope melting into quiet hurt. "She saw the mountain of gifts that Grandma couldn't help buying. She read the caption about how your grandbabies deserve the world. And then she turned to me and asked if Grandma had forgotten her. Again." Leonard's jaw tightened, his fingers curling against the table as if they needed something to hold on to. For the first time that morning, he looked not panicked, but pained. "She asked that?" he whispered. "Yes," I said. And I realized that by saying nothing, by continuing to bankroll this whole charade, I was telling my daughter that it was acceptable for people who claim to love her to treat her like she's optional. I won't do that anymore. He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand, suddenly looking older than he had the last time I saw him. "I didn't know," he managed. "I didn't know she said that to you. I didn't know about the gifts." "I believe you," I said, because I did. My father had always been more silence than action, but not malicious. "But you also didn't ask. You didn't look closely enough to see how uneven it's all become. You trusted Mom to tell you the truth, and when she didn't, you let that be the end of it." Exhaled slowly, the sound somewhere between a sigh and a surrender. "So you canceled everything?" "Yes," I replied. "You're adults. You'll have to figure it out like I do, like I have while raising a child she routinely forgets when it's time to play best grandma ever." He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. After a long pause, he said, hoarse, "What are we supposed to do now? We really can't keep up with everything on our own." "Maybe you cancel a few shopping trips," I said quietly. "Maybe you scale back Christmas. Maybe you treat all your grandchildren the same, even if that means less for each one. What you can't do anymore is ask me to finance a life where my daughter is good enough to pose with on Facebook when it suits you, but not good enough to show up for when it counts." We sat there, the hum of the fridge and the distant whoosh of passing cars filling the spaces between us. I could feel his guilt pressing against the table like a shared weight. Finally, Leonard straightened. "I'm going to talk to your mother," he said, more to himself than to me. This isn't right, any of it. It hasn't been for a long time." I didn't argue. I also didn't reassure him that Margaret would understand. She has always treated her preferences like heirlooms, precious, unquestionable. He stood slowly, every movement measured. At the door, his hand rested on the knob for a heartbeat. He turned back toward me, eyes shining with something that might have been tears he refused to let fall. "I'm sorry, Claire," he said, "for not seeing this sooner, for letting it get so far." The apology landed somewhere deep and sore inside me. I nodded once. "Thank you for saying it." After he left, the apartment seemed to settle, the sound of his footsteps fading down the stairwell. For a few minutes, I just stood there, my palm pressed flat against the cool wood of the door, breathing. The rush I'd half expected, a spike of triumph, a surge of satisfaction, didn't come. What I felt instead was something steadier, the faint but undeniable lightness of a weight finally set down. It didn't take long for the second storm to arrive. My phone began to ring before Leonard could have even reached his car. Margaret's name flashed across the screen, a tiny battleground. I let it buzz twice, 3 times, then answered. "Hi, Mom." Her voice hit me like cold glass. "What did you do?" she hissed, skipping any pretense of greeting. "Your father just told me the payments didn't go through." "Every account, did you cancel them?" "I did," I replied, keeping my tone level. "Why?" The word snapped. Underneath it, fury and disbelief twisted together. "How could you do that to us without warning? We were counting on you." There it was, not gratitude for years of support, not regret, just entitlement. "And that," I said quietly, "is exactly the problem. You were counting on me like it was my job to keep you comfortable. Like my money and time and energy existed to support choices I had no say in." "This isn't about choices," she shot back. "It's about family. Families help each other. Families also treat each other with basic respect," I countered. "They don't demand everything from one child while lavishing attention and gifts on another. They don't look at their granddaughter and decide she's worth less because her mother isn't their favorite." There was a brief, icy silence on the line. I could imagine her lips thinning, her eyes narrowing. "You're being emotional," she said finally, reaching for her favorite weapon. "You're blowing things out of proportion like you always do." I almost laughed because if she could have felt my pulse right then, she would have known just how wrong she was. "This," I said, my voice nearly calm enough to be mistaken for casual, "is the least emotional I've ever been with you. I'm done crying myself into acceptance while you pretend not to notice the mess you've made." Her breath crackled through the speaker, sharp. "We never meant to hurt Daisy," she snapped, softer now, as if the name burned. "We love her, you know that." I closed my eyes briefly, an image of Daisy's face flaring in the dark behind my lids, the moment her hopeful eyes dulled at the sight of that tree. "But you did hurt her," I said, "and you didn't even realize it until the money stopped. That tells me exactly where your priorities have been." I heard the faintest tremor when she spoke again. "What did she say?" "She asked me if you'd forgotten her again," I answered. On the other end of the line, there was a tiny, stuttering sound, either a breath caught in her throat or the crumbling of a carefully constructed narrative. "Margaret," I continued, using her name because Mom suddenly felt like a title she hadn't earned. "You've been forgetting me in favor of Victoria since I was a kid. I learned to live with that, but I won't let you do it to Daisy. I used to cushion everything for you, explain away the hurt you caused. I'm done, you forgot her, and now I'm remembering us." For a moment, there was only static and the hum of the line, then a sharp click. She had hung up. I stared at my phone for a long second, then placed it gently on the table. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't racing. If anything, it felt slower, each beat a deliberate step away from the version of myself who would have called back, apologized for overreacting, and offered to cover one more month. The revenge, if you can call it that, wasn't in the shouting or the hanging up. It was in the stillness that followed, in the way I refused to rush into the silence with my usual frantic explanations. For once, they would have to sit in the discomfort they created. The next day, snow began falling in earnest, thick, heavy flakes that stuck to the sidewalks and softened the sound of traffic. Late that morning, a hesitant knock echoed through the apartment, not the frantic pounding from before, but something cautious, almost shy. When I opened the door, Leonard stood there holding a white bakery box tied with twine and a card that looked like it had been made from folded printer paper. He shifted his weight from foot to foot like a boy about to confess something to a principal. "This is for Daisy," he said, the words tumbling out. Up close, he looked like he hadn't slept much. "I know it doesn't fix anything, but she should never feel forgotten, not by us." Daisy, drawn by the word us, appeared at my side, peeking around my hip. When she saw her grandfather, her eyes brightened, questions and forgiveness warring quietly behind them. Leonard crouched down so he was level with her, the bakery box balanced precariously on one knee. He held out the card first. Her name, Daisy, was written on the front in uneven block letters as if he'd practiced and still not quite gotten it right. "I'm sorry we made you sad," he told her, his voice thick. "Grandpa, going to try really hard to do better, to remember you the way you deserve. For all the ways adults complicate love, children make it simple." Daisy took the card, studied it with grave seriousness, then put her small arms around his neck. "Okay," she murmured into his shoulder. "I like the sprinkles on your cookies." He laughed, a wet, shaky sound, and I knew without asking that the box was filled with the kind of frosted sugar cookies she adored. It was a small gesture, yes. It also felt like a crack of light in a wall that had stood for far too long. Later, after the cookies were arranged on a plate and Daisy had finished carefully licking frosting from each fingertip, my phone pinged with a new message. This time, it was from Margaret. 3 words glowed on the screen. "Can we talk?" No excuses, no justifications, no manipulative add-ons about how much she'd sacrificed or how ungrateful I was. Just a question, an opening. Old me would have jumped to reply, heart pounding, desperate to mend the rift. The woman who had canceled those payments and sat with the fallout did something different. I put the phone down on the windowsill and watched Daisy at the table, humming to herself as she drew a family of snowmen, each one holding hands. The room felt balanced for once. Quiet, but not in that brittle way it used to when I was swallowing my own needs. This quiet felt earned. Boundaries, I was learning, don't always slam doors. Sometimes they simply frame them, making it clear where one person ends and another begins. Maybe I would talk to Margaret. Maybe we'd dig into decades of hurt. Maybe she'd never really see it. But any conversation from now on would happen on different terms, with my daughter's heart as the center of my calculations, not my mother's approval. In the days that followed, I resisted every urge to smooth things over. When the silence between my parents and me grew thick, I let it. When Margaret didn't call again right away, I didn't chase her. My bank account stopped bleeding a little each month. More importantly, so did my self-respect. The small, constant ache of being the one who holds everything together while being treated as an afterthought began to fade, replaced by a quieter, sturdier feeling. I had chosen my child over my parents' comfort. I had chosen myself over playing the supporting role in someone else's story. And that, more than any shouted confrontation or dramatic exit, was the heart of my revenge. It forced them to confront not only their finances, but the emptiness of their best grandma narrative without my silent subsidy. Daisy laughed more that week. She didn't know the details, just that Grandpa had showed up for her and that Mom seemed less tired, less stretched thin and brittle. Our home felt different, still small, still imperfect, but undeniably ours. If anything in this story brushed against an old bruise in you, if you've ever been the forgotten daughter or the child caught in someone else's favoritism, if you've ever propped up a family that wouldn't stand up for you, know that you are not the only one who's had to choose between peace and pretending. And if hearing how I finally stepped out of my assigned role made something inside you sit up and pay attention, stay with me. Like this video, so more women who need to hear it can find it. Subscribe if you want more stories of quiet, calculated revenge that looks a lot like healing. And tell me in the comments if you've ever had to cut someone off, not out of malice, but to protect the little girl still living inside you or the one sleeping down the hall. I'm listening.